Politics #1, containment begun by President Truman in 1947. The United States will give economic and military aid to stop the spread of communism. Aligns with the domino theory that communism would spread. Policy #2, bring Mexican President Eisenhower threatened massive retaliation. If provoked, hopeful this would deter any Soviet strike. Like a game of chicken, mutually assured destruction. If bombs are ever used, President Kennedy made it part of his flexible response. The term massive retaliation was coined by the Eisenhower administration. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles in a speech on January 12, 1954. Dulles stated, "We need allies and collective security. Our purpose is to make these relations more effective, less costly. This can be done by placing more reliance on deterrent power and less dependence on local defensive power." Policy #3, to tend to an easing of tensions after years of both nations on edge. Begun by Nixon and Brezhnev in the 1970s. More talks and treaties until the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Detente, meaning relaxation, is the easing of strained relations, especially in a political situation through verbal communication. In the Cold War, it was the policy of relaxing tensions between Moscow and the West, as promoted by Nixon, Kissinger, and Brezhnev. The Nixon administration promoted greater dialogue with the Soviets, including regular summit meetings and negotiations over arms control. Detent, meaning relationship of tension. When Richard Nixon was forced to resign due to Watergate, Brezhnev used the opportunity to expand Soviet influence. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 decisively ended any talk. Russian reforms in the 1980s. Glasnost promotes greater transparency, allows for some private companies. Russia's first McDonald's set the record for most customers in a day by serving over 30,000 people in 1990 for the ordinary Soviet citizen. During Perestroika, McDonald's offered a glimpse of what life was like on the other side of the Iron Curtain. Glasnost means openness and transparency and was popularized by Mikhail Gorbachev as a political slogan for increased government transparency in the Soviet Union. Glasnost reflected a commitment to getting Soviet citizens to discuss the problems of their system publicly and seek solutions. Gorbachev encouraged popular scrutiny and criticism of leaders and some exposure by the media. Some critics would define the term as Glasnost as a tortoise towards freedom of speech. Perestroika was a political and economic movement for reformation within the Communist Party during the 1980s and is widely associated with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev and Glasnost. Perestroika is sometimes argued to be a significant cause of the revolutions of 1989 and the dissolution of the Soviet Union, which marked the end of the Cold War. Revolution protests begin in the Baltic Republic. Satellite states break away and attempt democracy. Berlin Wall was torn down in 1989. Soviet Union collapses and becomes Russia. The end of the Soviet Union was a process of internal breakdown, which began in the late 1980s with growing unrest in the national republics. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania saw large anti-Soviet protests in 1987. The six Warsaw Pact countries of Eastern Europe, East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, while somewhat independent were Soviet satellite states. Gorbachev began a policy of non-intervention in 1989. A wave of revolution swept the Eastern Bloc in 1989. Hungary removed their border fence and thousands of East Germans escaped to the West. This led to the peaceful revolution and the removal of the Berlin Wall, with Germany reunified in 1990. The USSR voted itself out of existence by the Supreme Soviet in 1991. Soviet President Gorbachev, the eighth and final leader of the USSR, resigned, declared his office extinct, and handed over its powers, including control of the Soviet nuclear missile launching codes, to Russian President Boris Yeltsin. That evening at 7:32 p.m., the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time and replaced with the pre-revolutionary Russian flag.